On the morning I opened the envelope, I almost dropped my coffee. After years of silence, after birthdays forgotten and phone calls ignored, my son Alvin had finally sent me an invitation, a Christmas invitation. For a moment, my hands shook as if that little card held the weight of my whole life. I should have been happy. I should have felt relief. Instead, my chest tightened. Why now? Why, after so many years of being pushed aside, did he suddenly remember his mother? I sat at my kitchen table in Asheville, the December light slanting through the window, hitting the chipped rim of my mug. The words were polite, cold even. "Mom, come to Christmas at our place in Charleston. Ivy and I thought it would be nice. Dinner at 5. Alvin." Not a single "we miss you," not a "love you, Mom." Just coordinates, like I was some stranger receiving directions to an event. Still, I told myself, maybe this was a chance. Maybe he had finally realized what he'd done. Maybe this would be the year things changed. I packed carefully. A new sweater I had bought on sale, a scarf I'd been saving, and a tin of cookies I baked from scratch. Old habits die hard. I still wanted to bring something, to be useful, to be welcome. But as I folded each item into my suitcase, that ache in my chest returned. I knew I was walking back into a house where I wasn't wanted. Charleston was glittering that week, streets strung with lights, shop windows glowing. But the whole drive I felt like I was heading not to a celebration, but to a test I was destined to fail. When I pulled into Alvin's driveway, I paused. His house stood proud, decorated perfectly, a shining wreath, warm lights in every window, a house that looked like family, like love, like belonging. I carried my tin of cookies to the door, breathing in the cold night air, rehearsing a smile. When Ivy opened the door, her eyes flicked to the cookies and then back to me. "Oh, you didn't need to bring anything," she said, in a voice that told me she wished I hadn't. Already, I felt small. Inside, the house was loud with laughter and music. My grandchildren were running circles around the tree, their hands full of wrapping paper scraps. Alvin walked out from the kitchen, wearing a red sweater, a glass of wine in his hand. "Hey, Mom," he said, as if I were a neighbor stopping by. No hug, no warmth, just those two words, flat, detached. I told myself not to show it, not to let the sting reach my face. I set my cookies on the counter. No one touched them. Dinner was served at a long table that gleamed with silverware and polished glasses. I was given a seat near the end, not next to Alvin, not near the children, but tucked between two cousins who barely looked my way. Every time I tried to speak, my words slipped into the air and disappeared under louder conversations. Ivy was the perfect hostess, smiling, pouring wine, making little jokes, but each time her eyes brushed over me, they carried that message: "You don't belong." Alvin laughed with her, leaned in close, whispered something that made her giggle. They looked like the perfect couple, and I sat there, invisible. The worst part wasn't their indifference. It was my habit of excusing it. For years, I had told myself Alvin was busy, Ivy was tired, the children were distracted. But sitting there at that table, I realized they weren't too busy to be kind. They had simply chosen not to be. After dinner, we moved to the living room. The Christmas tree sparkled with ornaments, gifts piled high beneath it. My heart sank when I saw the way the children's eyes lit up, the joy of tearing open packages. I sat quietly, hands folded, watching as Ivy handed out gift after gift. For the kids, toys and books. For Alvin, a sleek watch. For Ivy herself, jewelry from her husband. For the cousins, sweaters and gadgets. I waited. Surely somewhere in that pile there was something with my name on it. But the pile grew smaller, the paper crumpled on the floor, and still no one handed me a gift. My smile froze on my face, my throat dry. The grandchildren glanced at me, confused, then quickly looked away, as if they had been taught not to ask. When the last ribbon fell, the room filled with chatter and thank yous. Ivy clapped her hands together. "Well, that's everyone," she said cheerfully. "Everyone, except me." I forced my lips into a smile, the kind that hurt my cheeks. "Lovely," I whispered. No one heard, or maybe they did and chose silence. Inside, though, a storm raged. Every slight from the past rose like smoke. The phone calls unanswered, the birthday forgotten, the holidays skipped. The time Alvin told me, "We're busy, Mom, maybe next year." The way Ivy once said, "We've got our own traditions now." The way I had swallowed those words and pretended they didn't cut me. Sitting by that tree, surrounded by people who were supposed to be mine, I realized I was nothing more than a shadow in their home, a placeholder, a convenience. And yet, I also realized something else. They thought I would sit there quietly, shrinking into the background, taking my place as the forgotten one. They thought I had no power, no story of my own. They were wrong. Because while they had been pushing me aside, I had been building something they knew nothing about, something that would change this night and every night after. I looked around the room, at Ivy's smug smile, at Alvin's careless laugh, at the gifts glittering under the lights. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of the secret I carried. This was the last Christmas they would ever make me feel invisible. The drive back to the little guest room Ivy had given me that night was the longest 10 minutes of my life. I had smiled through dinner, smiled through the gift exchange, smiled even when my name was left unspoken. But when the door closed behind me, my face crumpled. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my hands clenched tight in my lap, and for the first time in years, I let myself feel everything. It wasn't just this Christmas. It was every holiday that had come before it, every sharp word, every forgotten call. Every time they made me feel like I was standing outside my own family's life, pressing my face against the glass. I thought back to Ed's funeral. My husband had been the center of our family. He had this deep laugh that filled a room, this steady hand that kept me upright when life pulled me down. When he died, I thought Alvin would stand beside me the way his father had. But I stood at that graveside alone. Alvin barely spoke to me that day. He and Ivy kept to themselves, talking with friends, managing the children. I remember standing with my hands wrapped around my purse, feeling like an extra at my own husband's farewell. Afterward, when the house grew silent, I waited for Alvin to check in. A call, a visit, anything. Days passed. Weeks. The silence from him was louder than the church bells that had rung at Ed's service. Then there were the holidays. I used to make the drive every Thanksgiving, carrying pies and casseroles, hoping to be part of the celebration. But each year, it got harder. One year, Ivy set the table with only enough chairs for her side of the family. I sat on a folding chair in the corner. Another year, Alvin asked me to just bring rolls because the kitchen's too crowded. It was their way of saying I wasn't needed, not really, and yet I kept coming. I kept baking. I kept wrapping little gifts for the children, even though I noticed how quickly they tore off the paper and tossed them aside. I told myself it was enough just to be near them, but the truth, it cut me every time. The deepest wound came on my 70th birthday. That morning, I sat by the phone, waiting. I made myself coffee and set out one of the good plates for a slice of cake I had baked for myself. I kept checking the time, thinking maybe they were busy, maybe the kids had school, maybe the call would come later. It never came. By evening, I finally gave up and blew out the candle alone. No card, no flowers, not even a quick text. I had given birth to that boy, raised him, worked double shifts with Ed to pay for his college, and he couldn't remember my birthday. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my chest so heavy I thought it might crush me. Something inside me cracked wide open. I realized that I had spent years begging for crumbs of attention, settling for the smallest scraps of love. And still, it wasn't enough for them to give me even that. That was the night I promised myself I would stop waiting. But stopping didn't mean the pain disappeared. The memories came in waves, each sharper than the last, like the time Alvin told me not to drop by unannounced. "Mom, it throws off our routine," he said, his tone clipped. I had stood there on the porch, holding a bag of groceries I thought I'd surprise them with, and felt like a fool. Or the afternoon I offered to take the children for ice cream. Ivy smiled politely and said, "Oh, that's okay. They're busy." But later, I drove past the park and saw them there with her parents. I sat in my car and cried until the windshield fogged up. Even the little things piled up. The way Ivy would correct me when I spoke, as if my words embarrassed her. The way Alvin introduced me to his colleagues once. Not as my mom, but as, "This is Della." As if my place in his life had no title anymore. Each moment seemed small on its own, but together they built a wall higher than I could climb. Sitting in that guest room after the Christmas dinner, I remembered all of it, every cut, every bruise on my heart. And for the first time, I let myself call it what it was: rejection. I wasn't just overlooked. I wasn't just forgotten. I was unwanted. That thought should have broken me completely, but strangely, it didn't. It hurt, yes, it hurt more than I can put into words. But it also gave me clarity. If they didn't want me, then I had to stop making them the center of my life. I couldn't keep handing over my dignity like a gift no one ever opened. I thought of Ed again. He had always told me, "Del, you're stronger than you think." Back then, I used to laugh and shake my head. Strong. Me. I was the quiet one, the peacemaker, the background figure. But as I sat there with tears drying on my cheeks, I realized maybe he had been right. Because if I had survived years of silence, years of being erased from the story of my own family, then maybe I could survive building a life of my own. I didn't know yet what that life would look like. I didn't know where to start. But I knew one thing with certainty. I would no longer wait by the phone for a call that never came. I would no longer measure my worth by whether my son remembered me. It's strange how pain can clear your vision. For so long, I had seen myself only as a mother, as Alvin's mother, as the woman holding everyone together. When they let me go, I felt like I had nothing left. But sitting in that room, I realized maybe I had been wrong all along. Maybe the problem wasn't that they let me go. Maybe the problem was that I had never held on to myself. That was the moment my resentment shifted. It wasn't only anger at them anymore. Though that fire still burned, it was anger at myself, too, for shrinking, for bending, for trying so hard to fit into a place that no longer existed for me. But that anger gave me something new, a spark, a decision. If they couldn't see me, I would find a way to be seen, not by them, maybe not even by family, but by someone, somewhere. The next morning, I joined them for breakfast. I wore the same frozen smile, laughed at the right times, nodded when Alvin talked about work. Ivy asked me if I slept well, her voice polite, practiced. I told her yes, though my heart was still sore. But inside, I had already crossed a line. I looked at Alvin as he scrolled through his phone, barely glancing at me, and thought, "You may not see me now, but one day you will. One day, you'll realize the woman you dismissed, the woman you left behind, was far more than you ever imagined." And that thought, quiet, steady, was the first step of everything that came after. When I returned to Asheville after that Christmas, my house felt colder than ever. The decorations I had set out before leaving looked sad now. A wreath on the door, a string of lights in the window, a small tree standing alone in the corner. I unplugged the lights and sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the silence around me. The silence wasn't new. It had been my companion for years, but after Charleston, it felt different, heavier. That night, as I unzipped my suitcase and folded away the sweater I had worn, something inside me hardened. I told myself I would never again walk into a room and let myself be treated as if I were invisible. Still, I didn't know where to begin. What does a 72-year-old widow do when her own family has shut her out? The answer came slowly, almost by accident. I was scrolling through the internet one evening, trying to distract myself, when I stumbled across a forum for women over 60. They were sharing stories, small and large, about raising kids, losing spouses, starting over. Some were funny, some heartbreaking, some full of grit and hope. I read for hours, my coffee growing cold. Their words spoke to me in a way Alvin's silence never did, and for the first time in years, I felt a tug of belonging. That night, I opened a blank page and typed a few lines of my own. Just a story about baking cookies with Ed when we were newly married, and how we laughed when the dough stuck to the counter. I posted it, expecting nothing. By morning, dozens of women had replied. This made me smile. Thank you for sharing. I miss my husband too. I sat there in shock, tears on my cheeks. Strangers had listened. Strangers had cared. The idea grew quickly. If Alvin and Ivy didn't want my stories, maybe others did. If my own family had pushed me aside, maybe I could build a different kind of family, one of voices, of women like me. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not Alvin, not Ivy. I didn't want their judgment, their smirks, their offhand comments like, "That's cute, Mom," or "You'll never figure that out." No, this was mine, a secret I would guard. I named my project Second Wind Stories. It felt right. That's what I was searching for. A second wind, the strength to keep going when the first half of life had left me breathless. At first, it was clumsy. I barely knew how to use my laptop beyond checking email. I watched videos late into the night, pausing and rewinding until the steps made sense. I learned how to start a blog, how to upload photos, how to format text. Each little victory felt like a mountain climbed, but resentment followed me, even into this new world. Every time I struggled with a computer glitch, I thought of Alvin. He was an engineer, brilliant with technology. If he had wanted to, he could have sat with me, shown me the ropes, made the process easier. Instead, he had left me fumbling alone. I remembered once, years ago, asking him to fix my printer. He sighed and muttered, "Mom, you'll never get this stuff. Just call a service." His words had stung then. Now they fueled me. Each time I figured something out, I whispered to myself, "See, I did it, without you." The blog began to grow, slowly at first, then faster. Women shared my posts with their friends, and soon messages were arriving in my inbox. How do you stay strong? Can you write about grieving? Your words gave me courage. I couldn't believe it. For so long, Alvin and Ivy had treated me as if I had nothing left to give. But here were hundreds of women telling me I mattered. That was the emotional twist for me, realizing that my voice, the very thing ignored in Charleston's dining room, was powerful enough to reach strangers across the country. I thought back to Ivy's words one Thanksgiving when she corrected how I told a story. "That's not how it happened, Della," she had said with a laugh, dismissing me in front of everyone, and Alvin had just smiled at her, not me. I had swallowed my shame then. But now my stories were being read by people who valued them. Every comment, every thank you, erased a little bit of the sting Ivy had left behind. Soon the blog became more than just writing. Readers wanted recipes, so I posted them. They wanted advice, so I gave it. They wanted keepsakes, so I opened a small Etsy shop with journals and handmade crafts. Orders trickled in, then poured. I learned how to publish ebooks, how to set up subscriptions. Money began to appear in my account. Not millions, but more than I ever expected. Enough to pay bills comfortably, enough to save, enough to breathe. And all of it was mine. Not Alvin's, not Ivy's, mine. Of course, the resentment didn't vanish. Each time I saw their family photos online, trips to Disney, Ivy's smiling parents at the table, Alvin grinning, I felt that old sting. They never invited me. They never even thought to include me. But instead of breaking me, that pain pushed me harder. Each ignored holiday became another late night at my desk, crafting words that would outlive their silence. Each slight became another brick in the foundation of the business I was quietly building. There was one moment that cut deeper than usual. One evening, I called Alvin just to check in. He answered with a rushed tone. "Mom, can we make this quick? We're about to sit down to dinner." I told him I just wanted to hear his voice. He sighed. "We'll talk later, okay?" Then he hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, anger and sadness colliding in my chest. I had been pushed aside once again. But that night, instead of crying, I opened my laptop. I wrote a post titled, "When Your Voice Isn't Heard at the Table." It became my most shared piece. Thousands of women read it. Hundreds wrote back saying, "This is my life too." Alvin had cut me off mid-sentence, but strangers had listened to every word. By the end of the year, Second Wind Stories wasn't just a project, it was a thriving community. My Etsy shop was selling out, my ebooks were climbing online charts, and for the first time in decades, I had savings. Real savings. Enough to buy myself a new condo with a view of the mountains. Sometimes, late at night, I imagined the look on Alvin and Ivy's faces if they knew. They believed I was small, fragile, dependent. They had no idea their silence had pushed me into building something far bigger than their approval could ever have given me. I kept my secret close. I didn't brag, didn't mention it in phone calls, didn't post about it on family pages. Outwardly, I was still the quiet mother, the woman in the background. But inside, I was no longer invisible. And I made a choice. I would reveal it only when the moment was right. Not to beg for their attention, not to earn their love, but to show them the truth, to show them what they had dismissed. That day was coming, and when it arrived, Alvin and Ivy would finally see me. When the next Christmas invitation arrived, I almost laughed. After all the years of being ignored, after the birthday forgotten, after the dinners where I was little more than background noise, Alvin and Ivy had sent another card. This time, the handwriting was Ivy's, neat and precise. "Join us for Christmas dinner. Hope you can come." The words looked polite, but I knew the truth. They didn't invite me because they missed me. They invited me because it made them look good. To have the grandmother at the table, smiling in photos, playing her part in their perfect family portrait. Still, I accepted. Not because I longed to be there, but because I was ready. This time, I wasn't walking into their house empty-handed in spirit. I carried with me something far more valuable than the tin of cookies I used to bring. I carried proof that I was no longer the forgotten figure they assumed I was. When I arrived at their Charleston home, it was the same picture as before. A glowing tree, a table set with fine china, the smell of roasted turkey filling the air. Ivy greeted me with that same tight smile. "So glad you could make it, Della," she said, her tone smooth, rehearsed. I handed her a small gift bag. Nothing extravagant, just homemade jam wrapped with care. She accepted it quickly, setting it aside on a counter without another glance. That small gesture, dismissing what I had offered, was exactly the kind of thing that had wounded me for years. And though I felt the familiar sting, this time I also felt something stronger. Calm resolve. Alvin came in from the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up, holding a glass of wine. "Hey, Mom," he said with that same flat voice. No hug, no warmth, just 2 words to acknowledge I was present. I answered softly, "Hello, Alvin." My heart beat steady. They still thought I was the same woman from years past. But tonight, they would learn. Dinner unfolded as expected. The cousins laughed too loudly. The children passed mashed potatoes without looking my way. Ivy directed every part of the evening like a performance, making sure her guests noticed her flawless table. I sat quietly, listening, waiting. The moment came after dessert. Ivy clapped her hands, her bracelets jingling. "Time for gifts," she announced cheerfully. Wrapping paper flew, bright ribbons fell to the floor. The children squealed over toys. Alvin grinned at a new gadget. Ivy admired a designer purse. The room filled with thank yous, hugs, and laughter. And then, just like the year before, silence. No package bore my name. My hands rested in my lap. I felt my chest tighten, the old ache pressing hard against me. But I didn't cry. I didn't force a smile. I simply sat still, letting the moment reveal the truth. Ivy looked around the room and said, "Well, that's everyone." Her voice rang with satisfaction. Everyone except me. I looked at her, then at Alvin. "Not quite," I said softly. The room grew quiet. Even the children paused, sensing something had shifted. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't tremble. "I brought something too." Alvin frowned. "Mom, you didn't have to." "I know," I said, cutting him off gently. "But I wanted to." I opened the folder and spread out papers on the coffee table. Bank statements, sales reports, contracts, proof of the life I had built in secret. "This," I said, looking straight at Alvin, "is what I've been doing with my time." Second win stories. My business, my community, my work. Ivy leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the numbers. "Wait, are these real?" "They're real," I said. My voice was calm even, though my heart thundered. Every word, every dollar. I built it myself. I didn't need anyone to show me how. I learned, I worked, and I grew something you never imagined I could. The silence in that room was louder than any words. Alvin looked stunned, his mouth half open. Ivy blinked rapidly, searching for the right response. Finally, Alvin said, "Why didn't you tell us?" I let out a small laugh, not cruel, just tired. "Tell you." When you never listened. When my stories embarrassed Ivy, when my voice was always the one cut off. Why would I tell you something so precious, when you never valued even the smallest part of me? His cheeks flushed. "That's not fair, Mom." "It is fair," I said, firmly but without shouting, "because it's the truth." Ivy reached for one of the papers, her tone suddenly sweeter. "Della, this is impressive. Maybe we could help you. I work in marketing. Alvin's got business connections. We could make this bigger." Her words, that false kindness, made my stomach twist. I knew what she meant. She didn't want to help me. She wanted to take control, to benefit from what I had built. I leaned back and folded my hands. "No, thank you. This isn't for you. It's mine. All mine." The sharpness of my refusal hung in the air. Ivy's smile faltered. Alvin looked down, his jaw tight. I glanced at the tree, the glittering lights, the shiny gifts. Then I looked back at my son. "Do you know how it feels," I asked, "to sit at your own child's table and be treated as if you're nothing? To bring food no one touches, to bring gifts no one remembers, to give and receive silence in return?" Alvin opened his mouth, but no sound came. "You made me small," I continued, my voice low but steady. "You made me invisible. But I am not invisible, and I will never be again." The room stayed silent. The cousins avoided my eyes. The children shuffled nervously. Ivy tried to recover, saying something about misunderstandings and moving forward. But I shook my head. "No, you had years to move forward. I begged for scraps of love, and you gave me nothing. Now I have something greater than your approval. I have myself." I gathered the papers, slid them back into the folder, and stood. My chair scraped against the floor. Alvin finally spoke, his voice tight. "Mom, you're blowing this out of proportion. You're still family. We want you here." I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't see my little boy. I saw a man who had chosen comfort over kindness, appearances over truth. "You want me here when it suits you," I said softly, "but when I needed you, you left me alone. I won't forget that." I put on my coat, lifted my bag, and walked to the door. Behind me, the room buzzed with uneasy whispers. No one tried to stop me. Not really. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit my face, sharp and clean. Snowflakes drifted down, catching in the glow of the porch light. For the first time in years, I felt taller, lighter. I had not shouted. I had not begged. I had spoken my truth, and it was enough. This Christmas, I did not leave their house empty-handed. I carried with me something far greater than any wrapped package under their tree. The knowledge that I had taken my life back, and they could never again make me feel small. The drive back from Charleston felt nothing like the one that had brought me there. On the way in, I had rehearsed polite smiles, braced myself for cold stares, and prepared to swallow the familiar sting of being unwanted. But leaving, I felt strangely calm. The night sky stretched wide above me, the headlights cutting a path through the dark. For once, I didn't feel like I was running away. I felt like I was finally going home. Their words still echoed in my head, or more often, their lack of words. Ivy's fake cheerfulness, Alvin's dismissive tone. Every silence at that table had been another reminder that I was never truly welcome. Yet instead of crushing me, those reminders hardened into proof that I had been right to stop waiting for their approval. When I crossed the state line back into North Carolina, I rolled down my window and let the cold wind sting my cheeks. It felt like a cleansing, a release. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of their rejection pressing down on me. The next morning, I woke in my own bed, sunlight spilling across the quilt. I poured myself coffee and sat at my laptop, the familiar glow lighting up the room. Notifications from my readers blinked in the corner of the screen. Dozens of messages, kind words, thank yous. Strangers across the country were telling me I mattered, that my voice helped them. And then I noticed one message that made me pause. It was from Lacey, my granddaughter. "Grandma, I'm proud of you. Can I come visit sometime? I want to learn what you're doing." Tears welled in my eyes. Out of everyone in that Charleston house, she was the only one who had seen me that night, the only one who had looked at me with curiosity instead of dismissal. And now she was reaching out, not out of obligation, but because she wanted to know me. It was the smallest spark of connection, but it felt like a fire warming my chest. The days that followed were full of reflection. Part of me was still angry. Angry at Alvin for letting Ivy control the narrative. Angry at Ivy for treating me like an inconvenience. Angry at myself for putting up with it for so long. I thought about all the years I had spent sitting at their table, smiling through clenched teeth, waiting for the tiniest scraps of acknowledgement. The birthdays forgotten, the gifts never given, the phone calls brushed aside. I realized something important. My resentment didn't come only from what they did, but from what I had allowed. By lowering myself again and again, by accepting silence as if it were love, I had handed them permission to treat me that way. But now, that permission was gone. When Lacey came to visit a few weeks later, she hugged me tightly at the door. "Grandma, I read your stories," she whispered. "They're amazing." Her words touched me deeper than anything Alvin had said in years. We spent the weekend together, baking cookies, talking about school, sitting side by side as I showed her how I ran my website. She listened with genuine interest, asking questions, taking notes. For the first time in a long time, I felt what family was supposed to feel like: connection, warmth, respect. Not pity, not duty, but love. And yet, even as my bond with her grew, the resentment toward Alvin and Ivy stayed alive inside me. Each message I ignored from them, each post they shared online about their perfect family gatherings, reminded me of how they had excluded me. Their attempts to reach out after that Christmas, half-hearted texts, shallow comments, weren't about reconciliation. They were about control. They wanted to pull me back into my old role, silent, grateful, invisible. But I refused. One afternoon, Ivy sent me a long message. She called the Christmas evening a misunderstanding. She wrote about how families needed to stick together and how she and Alvin wanted to help with my business. I stared at the screen, my resentment bubbling. A misunderstanding? Was it a misunderstanding when I sat alone on my 70th birthday? When I brought food no one touched? When they handed gifts to every single person in that house except me? Number. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned back to my laptop, opened a new post, and wrote to my readers. Sometimes the people closest to you don't see your worth. That doesn't mean you don't have any. It just means it's time to stop asking them to. Within hours, comments flooded in. Women wrote about their own families, their own heartbreak, their own resilience. Reading their words, I realized that what Alvin and Ivy had done to me wasn't unique, but my response, building instead of breaking, could be. By spring, my project had grown even larger. I hosted online workshops, guided other women through starting over, and shared lessons I had learned the hard way. Each story, each connection, each small victory added to the foundation of the life I had rebuilt. And every time I logged on, every time I saw my community thrive, I felt the contrast. Alvin and Ivy had spent years showing me I didn't matter, but these women, these strangers turned sisters, proved I did. It was the sharpest irony of all. The family who should have been my home had rejected me, while strangers became my family instead. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Lacey sat with me on the porch. She was quiet for a long time, then said, "Grandma, how do you stay strong?" "I don't know if I could, if my parents treated me like that." I looked at her, the young face that carried traces of my own features, and answered honestly, "I didn't stay strong at first. I broke, over and over. I cried myself to sleep more nights than I can count. But then I realized something. If I kept waiting for them to love me the way I wanted, I'd be waiting forever. So I stopped waiting, and I started building." She nodded slowly, and I saw a kind of understanding in her eyes that Alvin had never shown me. The resentment I carried is still there, tucked deep in my chest. It's not the raw, burning anger it once was. It's quieter now, a reminder of what I endured and why I changed. It keeps me honest. It keeps me from slipping back into old patterns. When I think of Alvin and Ivy now, I don't imagine reconciliation. I imagine distance. The healthy kind, the kind that allows me to breathe freely, because the truth is, I don't need them anymore. I don't need their approval, their invitations, their scraps of kindness. I have my work, my readers, my granddaughter, and most of all, myself. Tonight, as I sit here finishing these words, I think back to that first Christmas when I was left without a single gift. I remember the sting, the humiliation, the loneliness. And then I think of the life I've built since, the community I've created, the voice I've found. They thought they erased me. Instead, they set me free. And maybe that's the greatest revenge of all. Not shouting, not fighting, not proving them wrong with anger, but living so fully that their rejection no longer defines me. I know there are others like me. People who've sat at tables where they weren't welcome. People who've been treated as invisible in their own families. To you I say this, you don't have to keep begging for love. You can step away. You can build something new. Because I realized something important. Age is not about weakness. It's about dignity.